Is this Operation Chokepoint 2.0? The SEC is clamping down on crypto, it seems. In today's episode, we're going to explore the latest developments and ask some big questions about what the future may hold for crypto. Sam, great to be back. Hope you enjoyed your holiday. And here we are diving into a very serious subject on, what could ultimately radically alter the future for crypto. Good to have you back.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I mean, you come back to shenanigans. I've enjoyed a digital detox, which again is possible. I have crypto holdings, but you can just cut off from the system and just go in enjoying simple pleasures, simple sun, simple salad, simple swimming. But yeah, we come back to the drama, the shenanigans, and I always want to say, Dan, it's nothing I haven't expected or been talking about for the last 2 years. So in a way, it's kind of it's not shocking to me. It's not that dramatic. It's a bit tedious, and it's a bit well, we're going to get into it. It brings up so many thoughts about the bigger picture, doesn't it? But I think it's good just to look at what's going on, why these moves are being made, and why I found it so predictable. And so also, I'm watching it, I'm interested, but I'm not tied up in the drama because it's nothing I didn't expect.
I'm glad to hear that. I got a little tangled up in the drama, and in preparation for this episode, obviously, I've read some of the latest developments, but I also listened to heavy doses of Rage Against the Machine. Um, and by the way, if they've gone off the boil in recent years, don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. Those songs. But anyway, it's almost triggered this anarchic teenage screw the system, because it's what I'm witnessing is this, again, centralization of power, as we've witnessed in other areas in the last few years, clamping down control mechanisms. And I know we're going to get into all of that, and we're going to look at what that all means in the context of this. But I think, given that we've started this episode really introducing two things, chokehold, Operation Chokehold 2.0, we're going to have to give some context on what that means for those who don't know about what that is. And of course, we need to put the meat on the bones around what's happened with the SEC and the latest developments. So, Sam, do you want to kick us off? Give us an overview of what we mean by Operation Chokehold 2.0.
Choke point. Yeah, choke
Choke
point
point.
2.0. I mean, it's all choking. It's the same. It's choking either way.
Yes.
So really, this looks like a second iteration. So we're calling it Choke Point 2.0 because this goes back to around 2012, where there's a similar thing going on, and it's really a clampdown on companies and businesses that were out of favour with the administration's, viewpoint on how the world should work, how the economy should work, and it's really about blocking those people's ability to bank. So in a sense, it's debanking those people, cutting them off, and that's the choking. This idea of choking, and that was happening with all sorts of businesses back in that day. And again, it was confusing because it wasn't necessarily voted on. There's a lot of mysterious. Where did it come from? Was it really a Democrat decision to have this? Was it FBI led? Was it Department of Justice led? So again, very shady, and really an attack on, and kind of especially in America, breaking sort of constitutional rights of freedom to trade and be able to be banked. And it sort of was a real overreach. And that's what we're seeing again coming into crypto, which is what I expected, which is really they're trying to control it as much as they want to do, clamp down on it. And so what we see now is the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, looking at really going after these exchanges who are really functioning as the on-ramps into the crypto space, enabling people to get their fiat currency out of the banks and into digital assets, be it Bitcoin or the myriad of other digital assets. So this is going on and on, but it's always this mixed messaging, Dan. So, the SEC have come to sue big players like Coinbase and Binance, arguably the two biggest exchanges in the world, and really go after them, saying that what they've been doing is enabling trading in securities. So really, because the crypto market has been unregulated, there's always been this ongoing debate: will the crypto, when regulation comes, will they be judged as commodities, which means they don't need to be traded by licensed brokers, or do they fall under the category of securities? And again, there's a huge argument. It's very unclear. There's all these sort of Howey tests you can do. Does it qualify? I mean, it goes deep. But really, of course, they've come out and said we're listing 61 of these cryptocurrencies and saying we think these are securities. Therefore, we're going to sue you for being an unlicensed broker. Okay, and what's interesting, they're attacking them during a bear market phase. That's the time they want to attack these institutions because they're pushed for money a lot more than in a bull market phase. And really, it's another power grab, Dan. For me, it's about control and power. And the great kind of mixed message you always see is the SEC going after Coinbase for being an unlicensed broker since 2019. That's what they're accusing them of. But we know the US government have been trading Bitcoin through Coinbase and industries that link
Yes.
them through Coinbase since 2019 themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's always this mixed messaging, and so they're looking at saying that securities are financial instruments and they fall under a different regulation, and that goes for just trading them, and that also goes for certain services these platforms are offering, like staking, which is locking up your crypto, like a um, you know like you might do for an ISA kind of thing and getting some revenue. So they're viewing that as a financial contract, therefore it's not a commodity. So they're really going after them in this mode. And obviously, what that's meaning is that's really a lot of banks are stopping working with exchanges. They're struggling to function. So it's really squeezing what we call the on ramps and off ramps into the crypto space. And my thesis being they don't want people leaving their fiat currency, leaving that system. They want them to stay there to control them, moving the CBDCs. The more people are coming this way, they are looking at different options, different ways of storing their wealth, different ways of transacting, and they're cutting that off. But what's always interesting is at the same time, it's not a ban on crypto. It's more, it seems like to me, much more attack on the smaller player, because we see at the same time this is going on, the big players, BlackRock, are looking to launch an exchange traded fund, Bitcoin ETF. That's technically, but just think they're launching a crypto product and want to use Coinbase. Okay,
Yeah.
and at the same time, it's being sued by BlackRock in bed with the SEC and the government. So it's all this mixed messaging is always down, and for me, it's much more about control than really about protecting small investors, which is the reason they use. So that's a kind of overview. We might get some more details, but that's
I mean,
what I'm
that's a
saying.
really, really great overview, Sam. And again, it doesn't matter which direction you turn. We are seeing these mechanics, these dynamics, power dynamics playing out in almost every field. But we're also seeing the big industry, the influence that like BlackRock will have over so many aspects of our lives. And we've discussed in other realms that, really these major institutions and the groups they belong to have more influence than governments. And
Yeah,
it's kind of the puppet and the puppet master, and it's really a difficult relationship. But at the same time, I posted a tweet this morning saying, how many of the crises of the world right now have actually been created by the established order and our relinquishment of responsibility to those establishments. So it's easy to look at the power structures and say, well, this isn't right. But we also have to look at ourselves and say, well, what's our relationship to this? Because your point around Operation Chokepoint, and I think, apologies if I use the incorrect term, Operation Chokehold is almost a proper, better term for it, representing what's actually going on. You're right. Where did that come from? Was it a lobby of the people saying, well, we want to rid our towns and cities and areas of these illicit businesses? Because again, if we look at the nuance of it, if you look at Operation Chokepoint in its history, they did go after some illicit businesses that perhaps people wouldn't want trading. But again, as always, lots of grey areas
yeah.
and businesses they didn't like. And we're seeing that now. There's almost a war on natural therapies. And,
Yeah.
it may actually later be revealed that there is an Operation Chokepoint 2.0 on industry, but the similarities are certainly there. And ultimately, and what we haven't mentioned yet is the Hinman documents, which paints a picture of the SEC interested in expanding its jurisdiction rather than fulfilling its supposed primary mission of protecting investors. And what those documents show is that the SEC is clearly more concerned with expanding its own turf rather than its long-held mission of kind of regulating the markets to protect investors, which ultimately is a reflection of an expansion of power. What a surprise, as you've touched upon. And the SEC has denied its involvement in that specific speech, saying it's just him expressing his thoughts and his views alone. Yet the documents tell a different story. They show that the SEC officials were weighing in on the speech. It was quite clear that the SEC was discredited in that document, and it shows that they really have no idea what they're doing when it comes to regulating crypto. Which brings me to my next point. You mentioned the Howey which Howie is from a famous Supreme Court case in the 40s, which ultimately created the regulation around this. There was a citrus farm in Florida, of all places, selling investment contracts without registering them as securities, and the SEC claimed they're not actually. The farm claimed they weren't securities, but the SEC won the case, and that's how the Howey test was then set. But when you actually go through the fine tooth comb of the Howey test, you can see, and we don't have to do that right now, but you can see that if you look it up, you can see why it's a blurred line. You can see why it's not a simple case story. But the SEC, when you look at the Howey case, you can't just blanket target all these altcoins and exchanges in the way that they are, because it's not cut and dry. It's really not simple.
Dan, I was going to say, you picked up that grey area is such a control mechanism always, isn't it?
Always.
It's a lack of clarity. So people, they know that once you don't know where you are yourself, and so, you will need honest business, even for some of the smaller crypto, companies, startups who are looking to create really interesting projects, even with the best will in the world and wanting to be compliant, they spend years in this grey area with all the stress and not knowing, and so that's where it's much more a tool of control than really about helping people, and that's what gets us, gets our goat up and gets that rage feeling. Understanding, I mean, we know this, but it's another iteration. It's such an overreach. There's no clarity, and I'd argue that's on purpose. And it's grey area. You don't know where it's come from, so there isn't that clear line of exactly. Like I said, is it a democratic process? Did the people agree on this? It's come from all these agencies. The strings are being pulled probably by bigger corporations, and I think. I was listening to somebody recently who gave a kind of nice simplification that, if you have the governments controlling all the corporations, that's communism.
Yeah.
But once you have the corporations controlling the government and its institutions, that's fascism.
Yep.
Right. And that's what we're really seeing there, that it's a lot of these institutions are just puppets of the big power players, and BlackRock is a huge, BlackRock, Vanguard arguably own a huge portion of the world across all asset classes, land. I mean, extraordinary reach.
Yes.
And those people are pulling the strings, and it's really about them using the governments, using the regulators to their own advantage. And it's really, as we all say, at the cost of the people, the man on the street, and their freedom of choice and their ability to maneuver and make changes. So it's this endless repeat of, for your own safety, for your own protection, but actually it's a protection racket. It's a completely different protection.
Yeah, and this brings up so many different threads to explore. I mean, the grey area you mentioned, to be quite frank, because of the innovative, trailblazing nature of Bitcoin and everything that's followed, you can see why it's a grey area, because it's almost trying to say, well, it's like this, but it's not this, and it's since the beginning, it's not been clear, how you classify these digital assets, which makes it a grey area from the beginning. But the challenge with that then is and again, this is again where I think you're right, the institutions will utilize that to their advantage. But almost as an industry, if we look at the kind of, if you don't want the state to play a role in your governance, then you have to become self-governing. And we've seen this with DAOs, the DAOs offer that potential for self-governance, but almost as an industry, it needs to come together, in my view, and it may be that this has happened informally in different ways, but in order to be treated as a different category, in order to be considered differently to other securities, then there has to be some clarity of definition under a new digital asset class, because it is a new asset class, as we talked about in our workshops. There are you can make some similarities with trading crypto as you can with trading stocks, but there are also many differences. Yep. And it's understanding those differences and recognizing, because there are those differences, it does create that grey area. So it does require definition. And if you leave it to the authorities, then they will happily try to bring clarity into the equation for you. So it is, to me, an opportunity for the industry to now take hold and say, well, and Coinbase is standing strong, because what we've seen some of those altcoins delisted from some of the other exchanges, which in a way is like a self-protection mechanism to avoid potential implications in the SEC. But you could say it's an admission of guilt, and you're actually handing it on a platter to the SEC. But Coinbase hasn't done that. They're saying, no, we're standing on our guns. and someone has to, and it's. I think the opportunity is now for all of us in the industry and the big players to say, well, if the SEC are coming, well, then what's the best case scenario? Because the other big piece to this, Sam, is, as we know, and we've talked about in almost every episode, in terms of reaching mass adoption, some form of taming of the Wild West is required in order to facilitate that adoption. We can't just keep it as this little niche thing for those who like the convenience, efficiency, and liberty of what it brings. So it's such a complex story.
Yeah. There all these energies coming from different angles, and you're absolutely right, Dan. And I think you're right. There is a genuine grey area because this is a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get one's head around all the new ecosystems being built, how they function, the tokenomics. So that is a genuine. You're right. Is a new area that is unclear, but the grey area that comes to the top is the lack of clarity of discussion.
Yeah.
Because if everyone sat down and go, well, this is a new paradigm shift. Let's talk about it. I mean, I'm talking about another world because that's not the world we live in.
Yeah.
But if our world was organically and not have this sort of parasite class, it would be, let's discuss that and see how this can benefit people and move forward. But what you've got is just these sudden announcements, and it's all behind closed doors, and it's different parties, vying for control. So it's people just waiting around for a certain confusing announcement, then another one, then some lawsuit. It's not about this collective discussion, is it? I mean, but we know that that's not what is going on in the world at the moment. That's what we'd love. How do we move forward? What's best for everybody? So, yeah, and it's going to be so interesting to see how it goes. And I think they also want to keep the grey areas going because it gives them time. They're putting all their pieces in place. That's what I'm seeing. That they know. Obviously, certain people. There's this accusation thrown at some of the regulators they don't understand crypto, and I'd agree, lots of them don't. I'd argue the bigger, higher powers that put in strings do understand where this is going, and they're using these puppets, and they want to get control. They want to keep as much of this pie as possible, which I've always talked about. They want to lock the small player out because this paradigm shift is going to be a huge part of the new world and the new wealth kind of transfer. This is where a lot of wealth in the world is going to move in this digital asset space because it is a future huge ecosystem, the future kind of tech asset class. The top people understand that. So all this mixed messaging of crypto doesn't need it, it's just a scam, as we know, we've covered that a lot. It's actually a tech sector that's huge and is going to disrupt all industries across the world. And so the top people understand that, but you're not getting that messaging saying this is what's happening. We need to work out how it's going to play. We're getting this mixed messaging of, it's not needed. It's mostly a scam. We need to save you from it, whilst the institutions are getting in place to control it as much as possible because they know it's big. If they thought it wasn't a future, they wouldn't be, positioning themselves. So, and again, this spinning it out, this lack of clarity, in my view, is also they're spending time getting their piece in place. And I'd argue they want, particularly coming back to that kind of choking idea in this kind of financial reset period, they don't want people fleeing to other asset classes and getting creative. They want people where they can control them, which is in their fiat currency, in their banking system. And it's really interesting. Dan, I was listening on the flight home. I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, and it was getting into that gold thing. And I'd agree. There are signs everywhere that huge institutions and governments are stockpiling gold at the moment. Okay, taking large amounts of precious metals off exchanges. They understand what's going on. But he's based in America, and he said he's seen a proliferation of stories, as we see in crypto, which are putting people off gold. And again, this is their use of the media thing. It's always the mixed messaging of, we're doing this, we want to quiet this, we want to accumulate things at low levels, and we want you to be scared out and make it hard for you, and also just to have doubts about it. And that's always, that's why that tool of the media is so powerful, because the stories are nonsensical. It doesn't take much, but it doesn't take much to get that emotion out there of some story. Somebody bought gold and lost all their money somehow. I mean, it's a nonsense story, but that's enough. They know to put enough people off that to bring that fear in, whilst they are busy accumulating these assets. Same time in crypto, Dan. A lot of retail investors get scared by what's going on. Understandably, if you don't have confidence in your long-term investment thesis, you may think, I don't want to stay in this market. There are lots of metrics we can see where big players in this, actually interesting, this last kind of dump the market had after this announcement, because it was a classic FUD event, lots of fear in the market. So Bitcoin took a bit of a plunge, like the altcoins did. But some of the on-chain metrics could see some of the largest wallets, the big whales, some of these
Yeah,
blue chip altcoins, they were increased. There was a huge move to increase their holdings over that time. So it's always that thing of scaling the retail investors while the big players are accumulating at cheaper prices. So there's so much going on.
there is so much going on, absolutely, and it's yeah, it's such a this is why we're calling it the Uncharted Territory podcast. It's
Yeah,
literally evolving and emerging as we witnessed all of this, and trying to make sense of where it's going to go. There's almost an inevitability of some level of regulation. But Mark Cuban weighed in on this one, and Cuban's an interesting character because at the beginning of this whole emergence of crypto, he was a vocal critic of Bitcoin and other forms of crypto. We now know he holds a fairly decent chunk of crypto, and he's weighed in on the debate. And it's right; he's made some very valid points in the sense that when looking at regulation, if you treat these assets as securities, it's not just a definition. It's all the governance that comes with that.
yeah,
As a company. So when you're looking at
yeah,
stocks and shares and all the regulatory requirements that come with that, if you're a Fortune 100 company or an S&P 500 company, you have whole financial and legal teams to deal with all those regulatory and
yeah,
financial
yeah.
requirements. But the fact that this is an emerging, again, to your point, and most people still don't get this, that they still don't understand that what this represents is an emerging asset. The emerging asset classes represents an emerging technology set for which the web, almost every digital web platform of the future will be based upon and evolve from. But what that means is we're seeing very small teams, very small, almost startups. And if every startup now in the US or the UK or any major economy had to go through major regulatory processes, it would seriously curb innovation.
Totally, yeah.
You have such red tape burden. So it's again that's another. I think it's a really important nuance because you can't tar everyone with the same brush, and that's the risk that's happening here. And the Howey test we've talked about, but I don't think it's even suitable to look at. It's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in many ways. Again, there are comparables. You could say you shave the edges off the square peg and it fits, but again, I think it's a whole new ballpark, and it needs to be evaluated as such because otherwise we will be stifling innovation and the growth of this market. And again, as you touched upon, it will just be the big players dominating. And
Totally, Dan. I'm so glad you brought that because it's can you afford the compliance? And this makes and I'd argue by design, barrier to entry, in the guise of it's protecting the consumer. But I've seen it in my own entrepreneurial time, Dan, in with doing having businesses or being involved with business and seeing a lot of independent people trying to start things, and I've seen it. I've seen functioning businesses where the clients are super happy, the service is amazing, it's really small, but certain regulation, once you get to certain size, you cannot afford. Literally, your business model is finished. You cannot afford to comply with the regulations that are there to protect the customers. When there isn't a single customer who's got an issue with this business, they're delighted, they love it. Yet the bigger companies giving a worse service and having lots of complaints, they are all compliant and they can afford it. So you're actually right, Dan. I've seen this so often, and it's so sad because it kills a lot of startups. It kills a lot of real, genuine small players who want to give amazing service, and it lends itself to the bigger players. So it is this, guys, again, of actually a bit of a closed shop. And that's we could argue when we get into things, even looking at the .com era, yes, certain individual ideas came from that, but also there's a bit of a who's in the right club, who's got the money to make it, who's got the
yeah,
money to fight the right things, and as we know, the big institutions become lawless because you think about big financial institutions, the way they work, they've got so much money that they absolutely break all the rules because they've got money to pay the fines and it's part of their business model. So they literally don't have to be compliant because they've actually budgeted in, they've got so much revenue, they've got to that size where they can literally, a budget, say, yeah, we're going to pay all those fines. We never put a business. So this is, again, what's really sad is, from a people's perspective of where can you get real organic growth? And again,
yeah,
it's that same use of it's to protect the consumer, but actually, is it to protect the monopolies and to protect the big players and make it a bit of a closed shop? And you're absolutely down. That's the big threat to a lot of really genuine small startup crypto projects looking at disrupting industries and creating more decentralized options. Can they be compliant?
yeah.
Even financially, and that's the real sad thing that we've seen over and over again, and I think that's what we're going to see as well in this market. And again, the big players who are in bed with all the big institutions will be able to come through, and they know that.
Yeah, and that would be a real shame for the industry, because you go back to the early days of the .com. It wasn't. It was this great. Again, we saw a lot of the utopianism of today that we're seeing in this industry, which is that it's this radical decentralization, and it has liberated information. I mean, look at how much information is at our fingertips now. But and again, of course, because of the craziness of that time, there was all the same conversations we're having now about the regulating of that industry. It is fascinating, but it poses a question for me, because I know there are binaries in this conversation around governance, and whether the purists in the market, and I resonate with their perspective of self-governance and what this represents. What decentralized finance represents, what this decentralized technology represents. We've seen self-governance with the DAOs that we've talked about in other episodes and how they operate. So the question would be, what is the alternative if there is no, in the absence of, SECs, the United States, and the other point on this, Sam, is actually, we'll come to this, is like, these are global. We live in a global world now. It's not like Bitcoin is an American asset. It might be. It might. Where did it start? Who knows? But it doesn't belong. It's not like we're an all American company. Therefore, we're going to be regulated by America. So we've now got this global situation with everyone's focused on the SEC. But what's the UK going to do? What's Europe going to do? What's South America going to do? What's Asia going to do? We'll come to that in a minute. But where was I previously before I diverted down that train?
Well, we're talking about the startups in the .com era and the struggle with compliance.
The alternative. What's the alternative in the absence of SEC regulation? Thank you. What would self-governance look like? So if what's the alternative? And again, it's I've been in the activist space now for a few years, and there's a lot of angst towards the government, and people wanting to deconstruct. A lot of people want to abolish government, but others want to reform it. But the question is, if you abolish or you reform, what's the alternative? What is the alternative? So what would self-governance look like within this industry? What is the way that you would pioneer a different way to solve the problems? Because there are problems. The fact that it is the Wild West still, it means that there are scams. It means there are, assets with no future utility whatsoever that are being pumped and dumped. People are losing money, making money. You could argue from a kind of libertarian perspective that that's freedom, and that, the price you pay for that is the potential risk. And I can see that perspective. But the other perspective around this is, how would you self-organize? And I think about my own street here. We have a local council, we have obviously the national government, and then we've got kind of intergovernmental organizations at the global scale at various different levels. But if we were to self-organize here locally, and there was some bad actors on the street, we'd have to figure out how we confront those individuals, how we reprimand, if you will, and how we would then restore harmony in the community. And we could do that on a community level. We could do that. We could set our own, come to our own standards. We could agree those kind of agreed norms. But then what happens to the street over the road? How do they deal things differently? And that's it's a level of subsidiarity. Because we live in such a densely populated world now, and we're not living in kind of feudal times and small communities. We're living in much bigger congregations at the local, regional, national level. There's inefficiencies in, I might get attacked by some of the more libertarian anarchic minds on this one. I would see there's potential inefficiencies in that self-governance model. So having a degree of centralization where there is, but that centralization wouldn't come from someone outside of this area coming in and saying, this is how you're going to do it from now on. It would have to be within the ordinance of within the self-organization, coming together to actually agree, coming to the table to say, well, how are we going to deal with this? And that, I suppose, leans into what I was saying previously about the industry coming to the table. But as you alluded to, the idea that the people, the industry can actually meet and say this is what we're proposing, and then have that accepted by the authorities who we supposedly elected,
Yeah.
is highly unlikely. So this is where I get a real bee in my bonnet about it, because we've divested so much of our authority and responsibility to central organisations, which have given themselves their own mandate. Because, in my view, no one in the public is clamoring at the government door, saying, "Please regulate this industry." So it comes full circle to this is about the SEC taking control and the increasing centralization of power. But my question is, what's the alternative? I don't really have any concrete ideas on that, and I think that's a problem for all of us.
Oh, it is a problem because the answers aren't simple, and they're not. So it's not a simple, it's not a simple binary fight of being against that and know what you want to replace it. That's really the unknown, and and I think this comes down to bigger philosophical points of, how much do you want the idea of this illusion of safety or security that I always argue doesn't exist, and that in a more visceral male life you're much more aware of that, and that's fine. But again, I'd argue they have got lots of people, and again, probably by design, to a level of wanting that visceral feeling of safety and security. Therefore, they are arguing for more protection from the state. This is this problem of going, I agree, Dan. It's almost like your point about the scams and all that. Well, maybe if in a kind of freedom level, you'd need people to go through all that and learn that there are all these scams, and that's the risk of life. And rather than to protect them from it being happening, because I always say, part of life's journey is not banning the existence of tricksters or scammers. It's you growing to grow out of being tricked or scammed.
Yes.
I suppose, and it brings up this bigger idea down that actually the path to that society you're talking about building goes through some really challenging, potentially chaotic times, whatever, that people will be very scared of and unsure about. But perhaps that's what's needed to get there, and so it's a roadmap full of uncertainty and security, but maybe that's what's needed to get to people growing up and taking personal responsibility again. So it isn't this one step you go, well, that's what we want, we don't want that. It's this journey, and it's not a path that most people have been considered walking, or I mean, it's so unknown, isn't it?
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, it is, and this is one of those. It is a philosophical discussion, and it'll take the world of free speech. It creates counterintuitive outcomes. So this idea that there's all this hate speech and misinformation online right now, and you've literally now got the UN really like partnering with global governments and nation states and big tech to try and clamp down on misinformation and hate speech. Both concepts are in completely subjective territory. But it's again that regulatory censorship for your safety. But most of the things they're trying to regulate are the things that actually threaten the status quo. It's a self-preservation mechanism. But counterintuitively, what happens is, and there's studies on this that show that when you start to suppress free speech, when you start to bring in censorship, it actually creates more hate speech. It actually creates more bad information. It has the direct opposite result. And despite this being a known concept, we'll see this in almost every area where you overregulate. There's an overcompensation in a direction that you're trying to solve. And there's the American book called "The Coddling of the American Mind" by Jonathan Haidt, and they were trying to reduce the amount of people with peanut allergies, because there was some problems with young children who were having these major allergies in school. So they banned peanuts in school. Thinking that removing that would remove the problem. We'll take peanuts out of the equation. We won't have these episodes of peanut allergies. But what ended up happening by doing that is it actually created more people who had peanut allergies because they just simply weren't exposed to it. So people weren't building the kind of resistance to the possible allergens. So again, it's a classic case of intent and means in discord and unintentional consequences. I know there's plenty of things we could say there are intentional consequences, but I would be highly skeptical if they're intentionally trying to get more peanut allergies. You'd have to really be in a dark place to think or maybe, some people are like, well, that is probably what they're doing, Dan. It's depopulation. It's
Well,
like,
Dan, I'm not gonna go down the rabbit hole. It's another one, but
yeah.
I found it interesting that there seems to be quite a strong link between this nut allergy and a peanut compound that was in some early vaccines.
Oh, of course. There we
So
go.
again, so it's not like always on everything. There is a cause and effect. It's not just come from nowhere.
Yes.
There is a reason. So, but we'll leave that rabbit hole for
We'll
now.
leave that one for another one.
But yeah,
Yeah.
Dan, I think your point's really interesting that it it's not allowing. Again, this gets really philosophical, but organic growth is going to be not messier, but it's this idea of a controlled growth that we're going to try and lead this rather than see where things go naturally. And I think that's that point interesting. If you let systems grow naturally, how does that play out? Rather than trying to control it and stifle it, and then you get actually, like you said, some things get pushed more underground, get more extreme. When a lot of those things are expressed, then actually it becomes more subversive. You see it in terms of societies where they really go hard on certain things, and they have a real sort of underground. Whether it's an alcohol problem or things behind closed doors that aren't discussed. So it is it is this kind of control, and it's getting quite intangible, these ideas, but how much we're fearful of things evolving in quite a organic, uncontrollable way that's quite scary to people, and but is that because we got so used to quite a comfy society at some level? I view it quite, it's a bit of a slavery system, a prison, but they've made it comfortable for people. And as we talked about the past, sort of freedom and it evolving organically, whatever, is a lot less secure. But that's that kind of way up, and people trade freedom for security or perceived security. But I'd always argue that security doesn't really exist anyway, and real freedom goes beyond that. But that's a kind of philosophical mindset that
It is. It's such. I mean, there's so many rich perspectives on this, and it's if we were to allow something to organically follow its own natural courses, how long would it be before rules and regulations come in anyway? Because it's the classic, as we touched upon in previous episodes. Just one person can spoil it for the rest of us. It's like once there is one deviation from the norms, and then that a rule is put in place, a mandate or a restriction or a regulation, that all of a sudden that is designed to deter other people from doing the same thing. And you could argue that it may have that effect for some, but it may also have the reverse effect. So it is complex.
yeah, and then it brings up that question to me of what going back to that idea of tribes, and at what point does it tip into something that doesn't function so well as a community or as a tribe? Tipping point that it self-polices very well up to a certain number, and then you go beyond that number and it becomes unwieldy and difficult. So there's so many interesting sort of socio factors involved in human behavior, and I think I've seen it even discussed on sort of Telegram groups as they grew, or sort of freedom groups, that again without any rules it often worked up to certain numbers, and again it's not blaming anybody, but it's interesting after a certain growth period it tends to become more fractured, harder to. And again, that's something just energetically, or maybe built into the nature of numbers, or harmony. That's not because a certain character came in later. It just seems to work at certain numbers or be manageable between the group, and then it becomes unwieldy and breaks down. So, yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider. And like you said, Dan, that we've moved, much more into these cities. A lot of people, and again, a lot of that could be agenda driven. They want people in these big conurbations. That causes different problems from being communities that can more self-police, and I've obviously, like you, have traveled and seen places that much more do that, and again having rules, regulations, or not even rules, regulations, or ways of being that are in tune with that environment and that kind of world, rather than it being this blanket thing. I think we saw that with the whole spread of the EU. That's one rule for all these countries with completely different qualities and different industries and different ways of life, trying to put a blanket thing across it and not taking into account the local way of life, or what's important. So that not respecting, I suppose that's interesting, respecting sovereignty, but respecting sovereignty of groups either, or kind of places or different traditions. So yeah, how to move back towards more of that whilst staying connected, whatever. Again, this is an argument for people down there. We have some people want to go into small pockets off grid, and I support that. Some people want to stay connected on the bigger world. And again, it's fascinating because so many of these things get polarized I was talking to a friend of mine recently about this, that so much division is caused by these really strong viral videos of these kind of things going on, but it's not often something you've actually seen in your local community.
Yeah.
And it can actually accentuate the idea. And the argument is that sometimes the powers be are actually pushing that because they want you to be, oh my god, this is happening in division. But how much has it actually happened on your street, in your community, and if it did, how did it play out? So again, this lends itself to the idea of how bizarre it is to have so much info, and the power of the internet, and takes us out of our local standing. And I know it, like you, Dan, you had a bit of a break yourself not long ago. I took 10 days where I completely, digital detox out of it, and so much of that noise quietens down. So many of those things that, even as somebody's aware of these agendas and I need to just come back to myself, you carry around a lot of this info. And when you come off for, 10 days, you can get much more present into really what's going around. And so, yeah, we're drowning in info, and that's challenging as a human just to be with,
Yeah, drowning in info but starving for wisdom. It's really. I mean, we've gone to a level of as always. We've zoomed out right outside of SEC.
Well, it's that feeling of feeling choked down and wanting to get, expand things and feel, what's outside of that kind of choking, constricting. Yeah, compliance. And it comes back to my entrepreneurial experience, Dan. I saw it. I tell you what, a great example was I was really frustrated because I was involved in kind of little travel businesses and things in the Alps when I lived out there, and really creative people doing small startups. And a lot of those, couldn't continue because of this compliance thing, and the big tour operators could afford to have these huge bonds with app. You just couldn't do it. So you had people had amazing little business models, independent chalets running things, clients happy, but they could not comply with certain regulations. And I remember during this time then going to Thailand, and what I loved seeing was that everybody, just their front room was a restaurant and a travel agent and a shop, and it could be whatever it wanted to be, and you could buy it. They didn't have to be a license, this or that, and it worked. And I had that real yearning for that simplicity, Dan, because almost like so much of this compliance, it chokes the creativity. That's what I think is really sad in terms of, people creating innovations, that you see so many people with startups who are passionate, have really creative ideas, and they actually end up getting bogged down in administration and compliance and stuff that's not their skill set, and it actually ends their business.
Definitely.
Or even takes away from their product, because actually their energy is so drained. And I think some of that's become organic, but a lot of that's built in the system. And that really gets me, because I saw that, and I had a real yearning to think, I've got these happy, I know people have got great clients like in Thailand. We don't need them to be regulated. We're quite happy dealing with that level. And I could see that contrast even then, Dan, which is often we talk about going back to the kind of less developed countries and thinking, God, that's how I'd want to much more, operate,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got a real example here in Bournemouth. We moved here in January, and I love being by the coast, and I've been looking for kind of the cafes, the restaurants, and places on the seafront, because I just I love to go and kind of work with the water in sight. Really kind of grounds me, and I discovered this amazing, what looked like an amazing spot right on the ocean front. It was like listed in the like top 5 like oceanfront restaurant bars. And I looked it up to go and find where it was located, and it's gone. It's closed down. It opened and it was closed within 3 weeks because the local authorities placed so many regulations on the business, and they invested all this money in building the thing. But it was like, in order to prevent like drunken disorderly behavior, you could only have like this amount of people at the table for this amount of time. You could only have this type of drink, and they had like, they were being inspected constantly. And the staff kept forgetting like what they were and weren't allowed to do. The inspectors were constantly looking over their shoulders, so they were just like, "This is too stressful. We can't keep up with this." So the business they closed up. They disappeared after 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because of this like safety culture. And it's not to deny that Bournemouth has a bit of a party culture in the town centre. But again, that comes back to like, how do we as a community deal with that problem? We don't want to initiate the issue as individuals. We want to delegate that problem because it's too complicated. But it is complex and complicated.
Yeah.
The camp out event that the camp out gathering that we're running in August, that hopefully you'll be speaking at with us in Brazers Park in Oxfordshire in August. But that is an intentional community. that lives there. There's a number of people as an intentional community in the manor. We've got the big grounds, and we've met them several times, and we've heard all of the struggles. It's again they are coming together to live together and work together, and it's just complicated. Human beings, our relationships with one another, how we come to agreement, disagreement, how we remain democratic, how we avoid like the madness of crowds in a democratic process. Like, it's so complicated. So I know we've zoomed out from like the SEC, but I think it is important because we've got to understand it's not just about like crypto being regulated. It's about our entire conversation about how we organize ourselves going forward, because what's happened is this is another example of a centralization of power and control, which is causing this innate reaction in us.
But it's the overreach, Dan, across the board.
Overreach.
And I love your Bournemouth stories made me straight off think about the film Minority Report. Okay, this idea of pre-crime, because in a sense, right? Let's look at that restaurant. What, from the sounds of it, you're talking about people who want to create a really good project with ethos, really passionate. Now they understand where they're coming from, the regulations, but really, what would be, and they almost punishing them before anything's happened there. So if these regulations are to stop certain things happening, well, they're punishing them. Nothing's happened in this place. The more sort of natural way would be, let this company start up. If then they get endless fights or problems, then you need to look at their system and come in and police it at that point. But the problem is, they're stifling business that, and as we know, life's much less binary than these rules. If this, and again, I don't know these people, but I just want to use an example because I think it could be a good one, is that if they've got an amazing ethos, amazing project, good energy, they probably won't have lots of problems there in terms of antisocial behavior, because that comes from the energy of a good place and creative startups. If they did, then you come and look at it and go, there's a problem. But they are being punished for it's almost this pre-crime. So you can't do anything in case. And I've seen business, same Dan, where I lived in France and seen bars that couldn't comply with even ideas that are about inclusivity and are useful, like disabled toilets. And again, I understand that's important and access, but it's gone too far. There are certain places where, like they said, you have to have this, and it costs you this, and there's also, you've got to go via there. It's an indirect taxation. You can't do it on the free market, build it. You have to use our people, and really being put out of business by these. There hasn't been a complaint or a problem from there hasn't been an issue from a disabled person hasn't made this a complaint against this place that hasn't got this. He just accepts that certain places can't. But this kind of overreach that everything has to be binary like that, and we don't judge it on a case by case basis, and complying to things that have never been an issue in certain places. And so it's stifling so many things, and it's so sad to see. I've seen it so much, I'm sure you have, creative things and even ideas myself that I've had that I thought I'd love to, and you just almost, the energy comes out of you when you start looking at the practicalities in the structure we have now, and this overreach across the board, trying to create. And again, the arguments they're trying to create a safe society, I'd argue they're trying to create a very controlled society and keep hold of power. But it's the overreach across the board, which is just overwhelming and lends us that feeling of get us out of this choke.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the ever expanding mandate that is self-imposed. That's where the overreach comes from. It's not from consumer demand.
Exactly. That's the key difference. Is it really consumers saying we need this sorted out? That's my always point. It doesn't seem to happen like that very often. It's usually coming from the top down.
Yeah, and it's that pre-crime idea. And again, why not focus on the bad actors rather than the whole? But this has been expansive. So let's summarize. Why do we have this conversation today? Operation Chokepoint 2.0. We've taken on the chokehold piece because of the nature of it. We don't have any insight on this actually being Operation Chokepoint 2.0. We're making the comparisons, but Sam, summarize what's been happening again, just to close us up. What we've covered in this conversation.
Yeah, so just looking again at the what I view as the institutions trying to take as much control of this emerging space. It's like everything, the shifts happen, Dan. And I always talk about cycles. This is a definite paradigm shift. It's not they're going to try and ban crypto or do it. They just want to control these shifts as much as they can. It's a power grab, and the argument actually, I think that it's about controlling these exchanges, not about destroying them. It's about, people, big players, like we see in the banking thing. It's about, more of these issues coming into smaller number of hands. big players like JP Morgan are circling Coinbase at the moment. So again, it's the same thing we're seeing, which is consolidation of power. And it's not about banning crypto or saying it's about trying to keep as much of the pie themselves. And I'd argue that they want to spin this out because they want a worldwide taxation and regulation system at some level. Yeah, there might be some differences, so they can really keep as much of this pie for themselves. And what's sad about it is really at the detriment to smaller players coming in this market and doing well themselves. And so that's the kind of narrative which I've been talking about for the last 2 years, and I'm just seeing play out, which is why it's dramatic at some level, but it's no surprise to me. And I think always keep your cool through it. Understand what's going on. Don't let your emotions get pulled around it, because it's quite a predictable roadmap. As depressing as it is in the way they play the games, it's also quite predictable, a bit sad. But that's what's playing out. It's going to continue, and we just got, like I said, we're in uncharted territory. We've got to monitor it, but I said, this is not the end of crypto, or this is not a tag of crypto. It's more really the big players trying to control things. And again, it's this mixed messaging down, which is always important to see it. They're talking about, often the crypto scams, whatever, but they're busily, quietly amassing the really strong assets. So if you hold really strong assets, you're confident, don't be scared by that. The big boys are also accumulating. They understand this is a
Yes.
huge move. And again, it's that double-edged sword of, regulation at some level, and that clarity when it comes will take this market to the next level.
Yes.
Just that double-edged sword is going to control it more, which, I'm not necessarily for, loads of those controls. The other aspect is that is what's going to lead to huge growth in this market over the next 5-10 years onwards.
Yeah, and that's why when you look back to the dot-com era and you see the early spikes in some of the stock prices of the big companies of today, that turbulence that was experienced early on after the dot-com crash, absolutely right. That technology enabled a whole new wave. Some of the regulations that came in at that time also enabled a whole new wave, and that's what we're facing. I think that's an important point. Now we've gone from looking at the practical nature of the SEC. Moves at the moment to like a level of abstraction that saw big questions around evaluating big questions around how we live our lives, society, culture. So the big question I have, Sam, in closing this is, because when we look at it in that vast way, it leads to big questions around what can we do. And when we ask that question, even then it's like, well, how do we live our lives? And that's it. But what are some of the things that people can do right now if they're concerned about this trend? I'm thinking along myself. I'm thinking, okay, if we know this is actually all part of the journey, and that we have this long-term prognosis, it may deter people from entering into the market when actually right now, and we're in a bear market, so it's a time to accumulate, in my view. What are simple actions that people can take as a result of listening to today's episode?
Yeah, well, I think it shines a light on that you have to be able to pivot and be curious and learn, and that there will always be ways. It's always about corralling the people who just hear the headlines, who don't do the deeper research. Because in terms of them shutting down different on ramps, some people might read that and think, well, I can't get crypto now. But that's not true at all. There are loads of functions, always change. There are always ways. It's often they're putting off people who haven't got educated, who haven't learned. And so really, if you're keen to understand this is the best times to learn about crypto. Because what will happen is when things get really exciting and we get into bull markets, that's when people will rush and think, I want to learn, not understand, and come in late to a market. I always say a lot of money is made actually in these times. People think money's made in bull markets. It's actually made by accumulating in bear markets, and then you're ready to take simple actions in the bull market. So, and this goes for anything, Dan, is getting out the noise, getting good education, learning, and not getting too hooked in the drama, and just quietly finding the good balanced information and improving your situation. We talk about at any level of decentralized. If you start to take more control, you've got some more assets in your control, whether they're crypto assets, whether you've got some cash out the bank in your control, you've got some physical metals. So it's always, I think, taking small steps to improve your situation each time. And again, getting out of just being sucked into the drama of the news, because that will go on and it'll continue. But while that's going, the people who are making moves are moving forward regardless. And I think that's what's really important, is that they can't stop you moving forward if you're somebody who pivots and learns and gets creative. they want you to be just, consumed by that and paralyzed. So keep taking steps forward, educate yourself in the areas you want to, because you just feel better when you've improved your situation, even in a small way, and you know more than you did yesterday. And I think that's the big part of taking your power back. So find the steps that resonate you. If you want to look at certain asset classes, begin that. Find good resources. I mean, you listen to this. Hopefully, you find this a good resource, give you a good overview, and really, yeah, don't get too caught up in the drama. Is always what I'd say.
Yeah, and last night, as part of the Navigating the Financial Reset group program, we were looking at the basics of understanding charts. The simple financial charts that we see within crypto, stocks and shares, commodities, precious metals, everything. And a big part of that discussion was around what makes the market move. And a component of that we looked at was fear and greed. And right now, in the crypto space, because of everything we talked about today, there's an edging towards that fear, because there's a fear and uncertainty and doubt about what the future may hold as a result of this. It hasn't gone off the scale, and you can literally, there are, if you go onto the web and type in fear and greed index, you can find fear and greed index for various different asset classes. And we were looking last night, it's moved from neutral into the fear territory. But again, that's where people tend to hold back. They don't enter into the market at that time, or people sell assets at that time, and brings us or reinforces the kind of bear market. But we've got a growing group working with us. But as soon as the greed index switches from fear to greed, boom, people will be flooding to learn about how to enter into the market. Now is the time to enter into the market in these times. So, to me, the simple action that one can do today is, if you are curious about digital assets and crypto, you might seem intimidated now because of this conversation, and you're concerned about what the role that regulation can ultimately have. Sam and I both take a long-term view on this. And in fact, last night's workshop, we cautioned that when you start looking at charts, you can enter into that trader mindset. And we're not here to talk about trading. We're here to talk about long-term investing and the fundamentals. And by doing that and looking beyond this turbulence, looking beyond these moments in time, and seeing the underlying application of these technologies in the future and what that will bring. Okay, there would have been people back in the 90s and the early stages of the dot-com bubble who would have said, Apple, Amazon, you've got to check out these companies. But there would have been people looking at other companies that just flatlined and went nowhere. We're in the same space. We've got to have discernment. We've got to learn the fundamentals, as well as understanding the kind of the detail of what's happening right now. But by focusing on that fundamentals, what's going on in the world, what's the practical application of these different assets, that then can enable you to say, I've got an entry point and I'm going to take action, and I'm going to enter into this market. Because to me, that's one of the best ways that you can support this journey. Because there's a notion that I shared. We ran a workshop called How to Build Free Societies outside of this within the Elevate platform. And one of the strategies I described was tactical withdrawal. And that's tactically withdrawing from the legacy systems. And we're at a point in history where you've got a choice. You can continue to support the kind of classic fiat systems and the mega banking corporations, or you can look at this world of decentralized finance and the digital assets that come with it. But with that comes, because of the stage we're at in its evolution, is a degree of complexity. In the future, everything will be much simpler. It's a guaranteed outcome, near guaranteed. So as Sam said, educating yourself right now, that to me is the practical answer. Follow this podcast, make sure you subscribe. But if you'd like additional support from us, I talked about the Navigating the Financial Reset program. We have a monthly support program for those people who are looking to be able to get practical hands-on support with actually getting into the ecosystem, making your first investments. It's clearly not financial advice. We're not there with stock, crypto of the week and, saying chuck your money into this thing. You'll find those things out there. That's not our job to do that. We're trying to empower you with the mindset, tools, and strategies so that you can become informed and make your own decisions. But as a really good starting point, if you're asking yourself, what can I do right now to educate myself? Start with the Navigating the Digital Assets program, which is a 3-part program that Sam recorded last year. It's an immensely popular program. Nearly 500 people have gone through that program now. Self-study over 3 modules that take no more than 3 hours to go through to get a really clear understanding of everything we're talking about here. Because if you're watching this out of curiosity and you're thinking, what can I do? educate and then act, because that's what it's all about, making the first moves. And once you're in the market, then that's how you're actually supporting this journey. Again, not to confuse, when you're buying into a crypto, it's not like buying stocks and shares where you're literally buying a share of a company where you'll profit from the upside. But in a way, by purchasing the assets that you're interested in, that you think have long-term potential, the way you gain is by the long-term growth. And we're in that bear market now where prices are lower than they will be in a bull market. So now is the time to get educated. Don't wait for the greed index to kick up and fly in, because that's when everyone, like we saw during the massive bull run with Bitcoin, when the prices were spiraling, that's when everyone was like, oh my God. But that's also where people made crazy decisions and lost money. So now is the time.
And it's important to know then that this is the accumulation phase where all the the clued up players and the big players, they're accumulating assets
absolutely
quietly, and that's it gets very technical, but you can almost see that in the charts and analysis. They're accumulating at these low levels, and again, they'll allow the hype to get out there, and they'll push that greed and hype. They always want people to believe in a low. Don't get in; it's going to zero, which is not true, and they want to suck people in at the highs because that's them taking profits themselves.
Yes.
Okay. So the big players will absolutely push that narrative and flip it, and they'll absolutely say, "Yeah, absolutely, bring more money in," because that's them looking to take profits from those people coming in the market. So again, doing the opposite of the herd, and we've seen it even recently, Dan. If people, the kind of scariest event in crypto in the last year was maybe the FTX collapse, an inside job after we discussed it in one of our shows. But, if you bought that fear on that day, you bought Bitcoin there, you'd have in a couple of months doubled your money. It was at $15,000 and it went up to $30,000, in that period after that. So again, it just shows, buy the fear, sell the greed. That's how the smart money plays these markets, and understanding the psychology and understanding that actually money is made in these times. It's realized in those times, but actually this is where the money is made in these times.
And to me, the concluding point on this, again, we've talked about power dynamics within this conversation, and it's easy to point fingers and say that there's decentralized powers and these big corporations that run the world, and whilst that may be true right now, we see that power. So by actually learning the strategies, because as Sam said, the smart money is right now is an accumulating phase. The less smart money, I won't call it stupid money, that's but we'll see those crazy decisions being made once it enters into the greed market. Again, now is the time to learn. So if you're interested in checking out our support programs, you can just go to weareelevate.org/reset, and you'll find out about both the Navigating the Digital Assets program that I talked about, the self-study program, which is an amazing introduction to the fundamentals, the good, bad, and the ugly. Even if you have no intention of entering the market, at least you're educated. And then you've got the Navigating the Financial Reset program, which is a group monthly program. We meet twice a month to give you hands-on practical support and help you on your journey. So those are tools that are there for you. If you're interested, check them out, weareelevate.org/reset. If you found this conversation interesting and useful, please let us know in the comments your feedback and hit that share button, because this is a relatively niche topic right now, but at this moment in time, it's really important that we start to educate ourselves. We're at the beginning of a really interesting journey, and if you're watching this, you're part of that journey now. But take the next step, and enter into the market, enter into the ecosystem, make some decisions now that can impact your future. That would be my closing message about how we take all of this madness that Sam's come back on holiday from and actually take the power into your own hands.
Totally. And the more knowledge you get, the more grounded you can be amongst the noise, and that's critical, because that's your real empowerment and solid grounding.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can see that from Sam. I'm a bit more hectic. Just over-caffeinated, red-headed Scorpio over here. But within that, you're absolutely right. The education is what gives knowledge is power, or knowledge is potential power. When you apply it, that's the key. That's what we're talking about here. Getting educated first, but then becoming educated is the first step towards empowerment. And when you're empowered and you break free from fear and find that courage, that's when you act. And that's when you're really moving from knowledge to wisdom. As we said earlier on, we're drowning in knowledge. There's all kinds of information. Everything you ever need is available on the web for free. But what is it going to take to get empowered so that you take action? Because it's the action you take today that will make a better tomorrow. So that would be my closing message. As always, Sam, this has been a fascinating discussion. We went from SEC right into major philosophy and bringing it back down into what we can do today. So thank you so much for watching us. Hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Uncharted Territory podcast.